Some towns in Michigan look peaceful by day. Quiet streets, empty sidewalks, old buildings frozen in time. But when the sun goes down, everything changes. Doors lock earlier. Warnings spread in whispers. Lights flicker inside buildings where no one lives. Footsteps echo through places long abandoned. These aren't just stories told to scare outsiders. Their townspeople genuinely refuse to enter after dark. Tonight, we're counting down 10 Michigan towns even locals won't step foot in after sunset. 1. Pear Cheney. Nestled deep in Michigan's dense forests, Pear Cheney was once a thriving lumber town, alive with the rhythmic chopping of axes, the chatter of families, and smoke curling lazily from chimneys. Children's laughter echoed along dirt streets as dogs chased one another, and women hung laundry in the afternoon sun. The town seemed vibrant, safe, a place where life pulsed steadily through every home and every corner. But that rhythm shattered when a mysterious illness swept through the community in the early 20th century. It struck suddenly, relentlessly, leaving entire households wiped out almost overnight. Tables were left set for dinners that would never be eaten, and beds lay empty where families once slept. As if the disease weren't enough, fires erupted under circumstances no one could explain. Homes, barns, and businesses burned quickly, flames consuming structures before neighbors could intervene. Doors swung open, belongings scattered, and streets emptied. Slowly, the town vanished, leaving behind only charred timber, overgrown pathways, and a graveyard that became the only witness to lives cut tragically short. But something lingered, a presence that did not belong to the past, that seemed to pulse through the silence itself. Today, Pear Cheney is a town locals avoid, especially after dark. One sound haunts visitors more than anything else: the tolling of an old church bell, echoing across empty streets, though the building has long stood abandoned. Shadows slither between broken windows, and faint glows pulse from houses that have been empty for decades. Visitors describe chills that creep along their spines, hairs standing on end, and a feeling that invisible eyes track their every step. Cameras fail mysteriously, compasses spin wildly, and even the bravest explorers report hearing footsteps echoing down deserted lanes. One story lingers above all. Decades ago, a man vanished near the graveyard, leaving behind only his lantern upright and metal icy to the touch. Locals refuse to approach that spot, warning children and travelers alike to stay away. Every creak of a floorboard, every flicker of shadow feels deliberate, as if the town itself is watching. Pear Cheney doesn't merely hold memories, it holds a presence, alive and patient, daring anyone to step too close. And so the questions remain. Why did the disease strike so swiftly? Why did the fires consume the town with seemingly intentional force? And what truly haunts the graveyard, compelling even the bravest to flee? Tonight, Pear Cheney waits silently, its whispers carried on the wind, daring anyone bold enough to enter, and leaving no guarantee that they will leave unchanged. If you're enjoying this journey into the unknown, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Traveling Guide Hub for more thrilling adventures.
2. Clifton. Just a few miles from Pear Cheney, Clifton bears traces of the same lingering presence, but here it takes a sharper, more insistent form. Once a thriving mining town, Clifton stretched across hills and valleys where lanterns flickered in miners' hands and carts clattered over cobblestone streets. Families lived in tight-knit rows of brick homes, and the sound of pickaxes striking rock mingled with laughter and daily life. But the mines hid more than ore. One sudden cave-in claimed nearly a dozen workers overnight, trapping them in darkness before anyone could reach them. Over time, other miners vanished mysteriously, leaving carts abandoned mid-slope and tools scattered as if dropped in a hurry. Homes emptied slowly, streets fell silent, yet something refused to leave. Tonight, Clifton is alive in an eerie way. The mine entrances breathe icy gusts of air that brush against visitors like warnings. A metallic scrape dominates the soundscape, a sharp, unpredictable noise that can strike from ahead, behind, or seemingly inside the shaft itself. Shadows flicker at the edges of vision, stretching and shrinking in ways that defy logic. A faint, pulsating glow emanates from the southern shaft, daring anyone to approach. Decades ago, a miner vanished there, leaving his cart halfway down the slope, lantern swinging, metal icy to the touch. No trace of him was ever recovered, and locals avoid that spot entirely. Hikers who linger report footsteps echoing when no one is present, a pressure at their back, and an instinctive fear that forces them to retreat. Every scrape, flicker, and gust feels deliberate, testing those bold enough to enter. The town doesn't just seem haunted, it seems aware, responsive, and insistent. Families warn children to stay away, and even seasoned explorers admit an oppressive sensation compels them to turn back. Cameras occasionally capture blurry figures, shadows that vanish when approached, or lights that appear where no one could have reached. The questions remain unsettling. Why do the mines breathe, and why does the metallic scrape follow those who approach? What connects these vanishings to the presence in Pier Cheney, and what happens to anyone who dares linger too long near the southern shaft, where the darkness feels almost alive? Tonight, Clifton waits silently, daring the brave to step closer, and hinting that what started in Pier Cheney may be far from finished.
3. Gibbs City. The shadow that haunted Pier Cheney and pressed through Clifton stretches farther still, now reaching Gibbs City. Once a bustling riverside settlement, the town thrived with miners, traders, and families relying on the river to carry goods and voices alike. But whispers of unease began to spread, subtle at first, then insistent. People left gradually, then suddenly, until the town's pulse went silent. The streets are overgrown, buildings skeletal, yet the presence that lingers feels deliberate, patient, and fully aware of anyone daring to tread its paths. Tonight, Gibbs City feels heavier than Clifton ever did. Visitors report that the river itself behaves unnaturally. Currents shift without wind, forming patterns that seem almost intentional. But the dominant phenomenon is a low, thrumming hum, a vibration that resonates through the ground and walls, felt in the bones before it can be heard. It pulses faster as one moves closer to abandoned homes, slowing when hesitation takes over, as if reacting to human behavior. Shadows stretch unnaturally along the riverbank, converging into shapes that seem to watch, only to dissolve when looked at directly. Every cold gust, creak, or faint whisper exists only to support this hum, never competing with it, allowing fear to anchor in the body. Locals warn that Gibbs City is unforgiving. Decades ago, a family vanished near the old mill, leaving the front door ajar and a rocking chair moving on its own. No trace was ever found. Explorers now speak of a weight pressing on their shoulders, footsteps echoing in silence, and the unnerving sensation of being watched from every direction. Families forbid children from approaching, and even the most experienced adventurers admit that instinctive dread drives them away. Curiosity draws the bold, but Gibbs City punishes recklessness. Every pulse of sound, every flicker of movement feels calculated, testing those who dare enter. Walking here is no longer just observing history. It is interacting with it, challenging the living against the lingering presence that spans Michigan's abandoned towns. And the questions remain. Why does the river pulse in time with the hum? Why do shadows gather near the mill? And what becomes of those who linger too long under a weight that follows without form? Tonight, Gibbs City waits silently, carrying the shadow that began in Pear Cheney, grew stronger in Clifton, and now proves it can reach beyond the past, daring anyone bold enough to step closer with no guarantee of safety or return. 4. Fayette Historic State Park. The shadow that began in Pear Cheney, grew through Clifton and pressed Gibbs City, has now reached Fayette Historic State Park. Once a bustling industrial town along Green Bay, Fayette thrummed with furnaces, warehouses, and shipbuilders. Today, it lies abandoned, buildings skeletal, streets overrun by nature, yet a strange pull seems to radiate from its boardwalks, as if something from the past is aware of every visitor daring to tread its paths. Tonight, Fayette hums differently from the towns before. The dominant phenomenon is light without source, flickering in windows, lanterns glowing on porches long decayed, and shadowy figures moving where none should exist. Last autumn, a local photographer set up a night camera near the old sawmill, hoping to capture the moonlit ruins. Reviewing the footage, he discovered a lantern glowing on the second floor where the staircase had collapsed decades ago. Moments later, the camera recorded a shadow darting across the floor, moving independently of any human presence. When he returned in person, the area was silent, but his tripod had been knocked over, a lens cap missing, and footprints appeared where no one had stepped. The park amplifies fear in ways other towns did not. The wind whistles through chimneys with uncanny timing, and floors creak as though heavy footsteps move above, yet upper levels are impassable. Shadows converge and vanish, testing observers, while cold drafts press against the chest, not merely felt, but sensed as deliberate resistance. Families warn children never to wander here, and even experienced explorers admit instinctive fear forces retreat. For those bold enough to linger, Fayette demands interaction. Every flicker, every echo, every subtle movement feels like evaluation. The town does not simply observe, it tests, it punishes, it challenges. Each step, each hesitation is measured, as if the presence is judging the living, deciding who may leave unharmed. And yet, questions linger. Why do lights appear where no human could reach? Why do echoes mimic footsteps before anyone moves? What happens to anyone who stays too long amid the crumbling buildings of Fayette? Tonight, the park waits silently, a living continuation of the shadow that began in Pear Cheney, spread through Clifton and Gibbs City, and now interacts directly with those who dare to enter, growing stronger, bolder, and far from contained.
5. Hell. The shadow that began in Pear Cheney, pressed through Clifton and swept through Gibbs City, has now claimed Hell, Michigan, a town whose name now feels more than fitting. Once a quiet settlement of general stores and summer visitors, Hell now pulses with something alive, something that doesn't just linger, it acts. The presence here has grown bolder, no longer content to observe from the shadows. The dominant phenomenon in Hell is sudden, violent temperature shifts. Visitors describe moments when the air plummets sharply, freezing breath in their lungs and locking joints as though icy hands grip their bodies. One recent encounter proves the presence's agency. Last winter, a group of urban explorers entered the town at dusk. As they passed the old town hall, the temperature dropped violently, and a gust of wind slammed the door behind them. One young explorer felt a solid, chilling grip on his shoulder, as if someone or something stood directly behind him. He spun,
yet no one was there. Cameras captured only static, punctuated by a fleeting silhouette moving faster than the eye could follow. When he returned moments later, his tripod had toppled, a lens cap was missing, and frost patterns marred the floor in shapes that did not match his steps. Other phenomena support the terror. Lights flicker across windows, shadows dart at the edges of vision, and faint whispers ride icy gusts. But it is the temperature that anchors fear in something physical and undeniable. Locals now warn children never to wander the streets at dusk, and even the bravest explorers admit instinctively fleeing when the cold presses against the chest. Hell doesn't wait silently, it enforces consequences in real time. Every gust, every chill, every shadow feels deliberate, testing anyone who dares to linger too long. The town is no longer just haunted, it is active, intelligent, and unforgiving. Doors slam, tools fall inexplicably, and even a simple step forward can trigger an unseen reaction. Questions arise sharper than ever. Why does the cold target individuals? Why does the presence manipulate doors, tripods, and footprints? And what happens to anyone who stays too long in Hell, Michigan, where the shadow that began in Pear Cheney now interacts directly with the living? Tonight, the town waits, its icy breath reaching for those bold enough to enter, proving the phenomenon has escalated beyond observation into action, and its reach may soon extend beyond what anyone imagined.
6. Idlewild. Stockton, once a bustling city of commerce and waterways, carries a reputation that locals whisper about but rarely confront. By day, the streets hum with life, markets bustle, children laugh in parks, and the port hums with industry. But when the sun sets, the city transforms. The shadows lengthen, and a quiet unease settles over neighborhoods that were once lively. Those who venture into certain abandoned districts after dark speak of a presence that is less of a ghost and more of a weight pressing on the air itself. The dominant phenomenon in Stockton is auditory, subtle, insistent sounds that refuse to be ignored. Faint whispers seem to drift along empty streets, often growing louder when no one is near. Doors creak as if moved by invisible hands, and streetlights flicker rhythmically, casting long, distorted shadows. One resident recalls walking past an abandoned warehouse at dusk and hearing footsteps echo behind him, perfectly in sync with his own, yet when he turned, no one was there. The air felt thick, almost tangible, as if the city itself was pressing closer to inspect him. One story haunts locals above all. Decades ago, a family vanished from their home on the west side, leaving behind a single rocking chair swaying in the empty living room. No trace of them was ever found. Explorers who visit these districts report the same sensations: shadows that seem to pause to observe, glimpses of movement at the edge of vision, and a persistent feeling of being followed, even in the quietest streets. Cameras often fail, capturing only fleeting, distorted images before shutting off completely. The city doesn't merely observe, it challenges those who linger. Every sound, every flicker, every shadow seems deliberate, testing the courage of anyone daring enough to enter its abandoned districts. Families warn children to stay indoors after dark, and even seasoned locals admit to avoiding certain streets entirely. And the questions remain. Why do these auditory phenomena seem aware of human movement? Why do shadows behave with purpose, as if alive? And what becomes of those who remain too long in the areas the city has claimed? Stockton waits silently at night, daring anyone bold enough to step into its abandoned districts, and leaving them to wonder whether what they encounter is a memory of the past or something far more present, active, and watchful.
7. Central Mine. The shadow that began in Pear Cheney moved through Clifton, swept Gibbs City,
punished in hell, and manipulated perception in Idlewild, now stalks Central Mine, Michigan. Once a thriving mining town, now a skeletal ruin atop a wind-swept hill, Central Mine is no longer merely haunted, it hunts. The dominant phenomenon is geological tremors, subtle at first, then violently unpredictable. Floors shift beneath feet, loose rocks roll without cause, and old mine shafts groan as if exhaling. A recent encounter illustrates the danger. A team of urban explorers ventured into the northern shaft last autumn. As they descended, the ground vibrated beneath their boots. Suddenly, a section of the shaft floor crumbled beneath one explorer, sending him tumbling into darkness. He survived, but the camera mounted on his helmet captured an unnerving image, a shadowed figure standing at the rim of the shaft, motionless, yet impossibly fast in the sequence of frames. When he looked back, nothing remained except a faint echo of footsteps moving in the opposite direction. Other anomalies, cold drafts, faint flickers of light, support the experience, but the tremors dominate. The town itself feels alive, its ruined structures testing every step. Locals warn that anyone entering after dusk risks becoming trapped, disoriented, or worse. Even experienced spellunkers report a sensation of being guided into danger, as if the presence anticipates each move. Central Mine doesn't merely observe, it shapes the environment to punish and manipulate. Every unstable floor, every shifting stone, every tremor seems deliberate. The danger is no longer atmospheric, it is immediate, tangible, and lethal. Questions now rise sharply. Why does the ground shift with intent? Why do shadows appear where the explorers should have been safe? And what happens to anyone who ventures too far into Central Mine, Michigan, where the shadow that began in Père Chenet now actively hunts and manipulates those who dare enter? Tonight, Central Mine waits silently, the ruins alive with tremors and intent, proving that the phenomenon is no longer just widespread, it is now fully interactive, adaptive, and lethal.
8. Singapore. The shadow that began in Père Chenet crept through Clifton, swept Gibbs City, tested in Fayette, punished in Hell, and hunted in Central Mine, now reaches Singapore, Michigan. Once a booming lumber port on Lake Michigan, Singapore now lies submerged in legend and decay. The presence that has moved through these towns no longer just observes, it interferes unpredictably. The dominant phenomenon here is water manipulation. Local legends describe the lake near Singapore rising slightly at odd moments, currents shifting in impossible patterns, and waves lapping at docks that haven't been maintained in decades. One chilling recent encounter makes this very real. A kayaker exploring the sunken remnants of the town reported a strange pull. As he paddled past a collapsed pier, the water surged violently, tipping his kayak. He struggled to remain upright, but the current seemed intelligent, guiding him away from the shore and toward the deeper submerged ruins. Cameras later revealed something chilling, a shadowed figure moving beneath the surface, perfectly timed with the kayaker's struggle, vanishing the instant he reached safety. Other anomalies, faint flickering lights on docks, cold drafts from nowhere, support the main phenomenon. But the water dominates the fear. It feels alive, deliberate, and targeted. Locals warn that anyone venturing near the lake at dusk or night risks being drawn in, disoriented, or even trapped. The kayaker himself admitted he felt eyes tracking him from beneath the waves, though no one was present. Singapore doesn't just haunt, it interacts, manipulates, and threatens life directly. Every wave, every ripple, every unseen current feels purposeful. The presence has evolved. It now actively tests and endangers anyone daring to enter, combining environmental manipulation with intelligent, unseen intent. Questions sharpen.
Why does the water respond to intruders? Why does the shadow beneath the surface move independently of any human presence? And what happens to anyone who ventures too far into Singapore, Michigan, where the shadow that began in Père Chenet now shapes the very world around them? Tonight, Singapore waits silently, the lake lapping with unseen hands, proving the phenomenon continues to escalate, growing more intelligent, aggressive, and impossible to escape.
9. Sheldrake. The shadow that began in Père Cheney, pressed through Clifton, swept Gibbs City, evaluated in Fayette, punished in Hell, hunted in Central Mine, and manipulated in Singapore, now moves through Sheldrake, Michigan. Once a quiet lakeside settlement, Sheldrake's streets and docks now lie abandoned, but the presence that has followed these towns treats it as a testing ground. The dominant phenomenon here is sudden, disorienting spatial shifts. Locals report that streets feel longer, docks seem to stretch, and familiar landmarks appear where they shouldn't be. One recent encounter makes the danger tangible. A small team of hikers entered the outskirts after dusk, following the old shoreline trail. As they walked, the path seemed to bend impossibly, trees shifting positions when not in sight. One hiker tripped, only to find that the ground beneath him had changed texture and slope, as though the town itself was reshaping around them. Cameras captured shadows darting from one side of the trail to the other, yet no movement could be seen in real time. Other anomalies, whispers, faint flickers of light, icy gusts exist, but serve to enhance the primary phenomenon. It's the shifting environment that dominates fear. Every step feels unpredictable, every turn could lead to danger, and the hiker's sense of orientation becomes unreliable. Locals warn anyone approaching Sheldrake after dark to stick strictly to the main road. Those who ignore the warnings describe the sensation of being guided and tested through a maze of their own disorientation, as if the town itself is alive. Sheldrake doesn't merely observe or punish, it reshapes the environment to interact with, confuse, and endanger intruders. Every distorted street, every shifting dock, every impossibly bent trail feels intentional. The presence has escalated, no longer content to manipulate light, sound, or temperature. Now it actively warps reality to threaten anyone daring to enter. Questions sharpen further. Why does the town itself bend and twist for those who enter? Why does the shadow now manipulate perception so completely? And what becomes of anyone who stays too long in Sheldrake, Michigan, where the shadow that began in Père Cheney now dominates not only the environment, but the very sense of space? Tonight, Sheldrake waits silently, streets stretching and bending under unseen influence, proving the phenomenon has grown unpredictable, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. 10. Mandeville. The shadow that began in Père Cheney spread through Clifton, swept Gibbs City, pressed through Fayette, punished in Hell, hunted in Central Mine, manipulated in Singapore, and warped Sheldrake, now reaches Mandeville, Michigan. Once a modest settlement on the edge of dense forests, Mandeville's abandoned streets and crumbling houses now act as the stage for the phenomenon's ultimate escalation. The dominant phenomenon here is telekinetic interaction. Objects move seemingly on their own with deliberate intent. A recent encounter demonstrates the danger. A local historian, documenting the town's decaying structures, set up a camera in the old general store. While reviewing notes, she felt an invisible force push her shoulder. When she turned, a chair was suddenly thrown across the room, narrowly missing her. Later footage revealed objects sliding, twisting, and levitating briefly, all synchronized with the movements of the historian, as if the presence was testing her reactions in real time. Other phenomena, cold gusts, flickering shadows, faint whispers, exist but serve as supporting context, enhancing the main effect.
The telekinetic activity dominates, turning Mandeville into a trap where every movement is monitored, every step assessed, and every action met with immediate response. Locals now warn anyone who dares enter after dusk. The town no longer merely haunts, it interacts directly, punishing recklessness. Mandeville demonstrates the phenomenon's full intelligence. Unlike previous towns where it tested, manipulated, or scared intruders, here it actively engages with the living, influencing objects and spaces to create danger. Every shifting chair, levitating bottle, and slammed door feels intentional, forcing intruders to respond instinctively or face harm. Questions now cut sharper than ever. Why does the phenomenon escalate so predictably across towns? Why are humans now directly affected by telekinetic forces? And what becomes of anyone who lingers too long in Mandeville, Michigan, where the shadow that began in Père Chenille now controls its environment and targets intruders with precision? Tonight, Mandeville waits silently, every object a potential threat, proving that the phenomenon has reached its most interactive, intelligent, and terrifying stage yet.